She thought no one was watching, but he was. Minutes later, 2 were dead. He opened the heavy visiting room door like he'd done 100 times before. Same cracked floor tiles, same rust-colored walls, same buzz of fluorescent lights humming above. But this time, something felt different. The air seemed too still, too silent. And then he saw her, his wife, his everything, dressed in the same blue sundress she wore the day they got married, when she promised to wait for him. But she wasn't alone. Standing too close, whispering something into her ear, was the prison warden, the man who signed off on his daily routines, the man who controlled everything behind those walls. He froze. 1,000 thoughts rushed in, none of them clear. Was she smiling? Was she crying? What was he doing touching her hair like that? His chest tightened. The warden leaned in, too close. Then, bang! A single gunshot cracked through the air like a whip. Black. But what really happened in that room, and why, would take months to unravel. Was it jealousy? Or was he silencing something deeper? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 3 lives intersected that day and only 1 walked away. The inmate, Derek Monroe, wasn't what most people imagined when they pictured a man behind bars. No violent outbursts. He volunteered for kitchen duty, read novels in his spare time, and counseled younger inmates who came in angry and broken. Guards described him as quiet, respectful, even hopeful. He was weeks away from release, 18 days to be exact. He'd earned that second chance. So why would a man like that throw it all away in a moment of rage? Then there was his wife, Rachel, a former paralegal who'd stayed loyal through 5 long years. She drove 5 hours every weekend just to hold his hand across a scratched metal table. At least that's what she claimed. But was she keeping a secret of her own? And finally, the warden, Thomas Keller, a decorated officer with 20 years of spotless service, known for running a tight, honest facility. No scandals, no allegations. But after the shooting, internal investigators began uncovering inconsistencies, gaps in schedules, missing footage, strange phone logs. Why did Derek react the way he did? Was it really betrayal, or something darker no one saw coming? And what was it that investigators discovered weeks later that made them question everything they thought they knew? What would you do if you were in Derek's place, believing everything in your life was finally falling into place only to feel it crumble in a split second? Would you forgive, or would you snap? Derek Monroe didn't grow up planning to end up behind bars, but his path there was paved in pieces. Absent father, neighborhood cliques, a mother working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. At 17, he got caught stealing from a convenience store. 2 years later, it escalated, an armed robbery at a pawn shop gone wrong. No one was killed, but the judge saw a young man spiraling fast and sentenced him to 18 years in state prison. That was the headline. But inside those walls, something changed. By year 3, Derek had earned his GED. By year 5, he was mentoring younger inmates, helping them navigate parole hearings, teaching them how to read, write, think beyond prison walls. The guards noticed. He never caused trouble, never lost his temper. He followed every rule like a man preparing to walk free. When he reached year 14, parole granted him early release. Just 90 days left. Derek had a plan, a future, and at the center of it all was Rachel. Rachel Pierce was the last person anyone expected to marry a convict, a pastor's daughter from a small Missouri town, raised on choir rehearsals and Wednesday night Bible studies. She had a soft voice and kind eyes, always volunteering, always believing in redemption. She met Derek through a prison ministry group during his 8th year inside. What began as scripture sharing turned into letters, then weekly visits, then marriage, right there in the prison chapel, under a flickering fluorescent light and a plastic bouquet. She came every Saturday after that. brought him news clippings, devotionals, little photos of her garden. She made the guards laugh, learned their names, stayed in line with every rule. To them, Rachel was no threat. She was the woman who loved the inmate most inmates forgot. But not everyone forgot. And that brings us to Warden Thomas Keller. To most, Keller was the definition of by the book. 23 years of spotless conduct, countless awards, 2 governor's commendations. He didn't smile much, but he ran a facility that never made headlines, which in that world meant success. But talk to enough people on the inside, and a different picture starts to form. There were whispers. Inmates said Keller had a type. Female visitors who dressed nice, smiled sweet, asked too many questions. Some believed he gave out favors, extra time, private room permissions, even bypassing rules, if he liked you. But nothing was ever proven. Complaints never stuck. Guards who spoke up were reassigned, and the few who pushed harder left the department altogether. Still, there was no evidence, no smoking gun, nothing anyone could take to court. Keller's record remained as clean on paper as the marble nameplate outside his office, until the day 2 lives were lost and everything unraveled. Ask yourself, can someone truly change? Can a man like Derek, who built a new life from the inside out, ever outrun the shadows of his past? And what happens when the people he trusted most betray him where he thought he was safest? August 4th, 2022. It was a sweltering Thursday afternoon, the kind of heat that clings to your skin and makes tempers short. The prison was running on routine. No disruptions, no red flags. Derek Monroe was scheduled for a standard visit with his wife, Rachel, just like every other Thursday for the past 3 years. At 1:12 p.m., he signed out of his unit and was escorted to Visitation Room C. That room was usually locked when not in use, a strict policy. But that day, for reasons that remain unclear, the door had been left slightly ajar. According to logs, Derek returned early, just 7 minutes before his scheduled entry. He wasn't expected to be there yet. The guard on duty had stepped away momentarily. No cameras inside the visitation room itself, standard protocol to protect privacy. And that's when it happened. What he saw in that room, no one can say for certain except Derek himself. But what the investigation later uncovered painted a clear and horrifying picture. Rachel was positioned near the far table, her back partially turned. The warden, Thomas Keller, stood between her and the door. Clothing was disheveled, her body language unclear. But Derek said it took less than a second for everything to collapse inside him. He didn't scream. He didn't shout. He scanned the room, spotted a heavy maintenance tool, a broken mop handle left behind in a corner. He walked forward, picked it up, and struck the warden from behind. Once, then again, and again. Rachel screamed. She moved toward Derek, trying to stop him, but that only redirected his rage. He turned on her. Within minutes, both Rachel and Keller lay bleeding on the concrete floor. Multiple stab wounds. Rachel had defensive cuts on her arms. The warden, no chance. Blood soaked the floor. Her screams echoed down the hallway. Several guards responded. They pried Derek off Rachel's body, his hands, shirt, and face covered in blood. He didn't resist. He didn't run. He sat down on the floor beside her, rocking slowly, whispering something no one could understand. Emergency medical staff arrived too late. Rachel was pronounced dead on sight. Keller died en route to the hospital. It was brutal, fast, raw. But what Derek told police just hours later shocked even the most seasoned detectives. By 2:05 p.m., the prison yard was locked down. Sirens echoed across the complex. Paramedics rushed 2 stretchers through steel gates. One never made it out alive. The other, barely breathing, flatlined en route. And Derek Monroe? He sat silently in a holding cell, blood still crusted on his hands, refusing to speak until his attorney arrived. Detectives from the county sheriff's office began their work almost immediately. The crime scene was sealed, photos were taken, blood spatter was analyzed. Witnesses were pulled from their posts for interviews. But something didn't add up. Forensics revealed Rachel had no major defensive wounds beyond a few cuts, consistent with instinctive reflexes, not a prolonged struggle. There were no bruises suggesting she had fought back hard, no torn clothing, no signs of restraint. Investigators started wondering, was she complicit in what Derek walked in on? Or was she being coerced? That question took a darker turn days later, when authorities retrieved a stash of personal items from the warden's locked office drawer, items that should never have been there. Among them, several letters written by Keller, not to his wife, not to family, but to Rachel. Some were typed, others handwritten, all addressed to her directly. Some sounded affectionate, others controlling. One letter, dated just 3 weeks before the incident, ended with the phrase, "You're not like the others. You give me something I haven't felt in years. Don't disappear on me now." The implication was clear. This wasn't just a passing interest. Something deeper had formed, or at least Keller believed it had. But was it a mutual affair? Or was Rachel being manipulated? Prosecutors began asking that same question. So did the media. The story exploded. National headlines labeled it, "Prison Love Triangle Ends in Murder." Daytime talk shows picked it up. Panelists argued over morality, power, control. The press painted Derek as the scorned, dangerous inmate, Keller as the upstanding warden, Rachel, the poor, misguided wife caught in the middle. Outside the prison gates, protesters gathered with signs that read, "Who was protecting who?" and "Shame on Keller." Others held up pictures of Rachel, calling for a deeper investigation into the culture of silence within correctional institutions. Her church released a carefully worded statement claiming Rachel had been led astray by unchecked forces, suggesting she was the victim, not of a love affair, but of something more subtle, something systemic, something that could have been prevented. And yet, buried beneath all the noise, one detail kept resurfacing. Derek had no history of violence inside the prison, not a single fight, no angry outbursts, no rule violations in over 6 years. Guards described him as calm, focused, changed. So why snap now? What was it about that moment, those few seconds in the visitation room, that turned a man 2 weeks from freedom into a killer? That's the question investigators couldn't shake. And the deeper they looked, the more it seemed the truth wasn't just about one man's rage, but the secrets others had worked very hard to bury. What do you believe? Was Derek a man pushed too far? Or was something festering beneath the surface long before that door was ever opened? And more importantly, how well do we really know the people we trust to keep order behind locked doors? The trial began 6 months later under heavy security and even heavier scrutiny. The courtroom was packed. Press, protesters, law students, former inmates. Everyone came looking for answers. Derek Monroe, now shackled and pale, stood before a jury of 12. No longer the hopeful man he was just months earlier. His eyes looked heavier. But when it was his turn to speak, he didn't hesitate. He looked straight ahead and said, "He told me, if I didn't let him have her, he'd make sure I never saw the outside again." Gasps filled the room. The prosecution objected, the judge overruled, and just like that, the courtroom shifted. Derek's defense team introduced text messages pulled from Rachel's old phone, messages she'd never deleted. They'd been recovered weeks after her death during a forensic deep dive. Conversations between Rachel and Warden Keller that no one had seen before. One message, time-stamped 2 days before the attack, read, "Don't forget who has the keys to his freedom." Another said, "You know the deal. This is how he gets home. You agreed." And then came the bombshell. A pre-recorded interview from Rachel herself, found on a secure drive in her home laptop. It was dated just weeks before she died. In it, her voice trembled. "I felt like I didn't have a choice. I thought, if I said no, he'd retaliate. Not against me, against Derek. He said he could delay his release, block it even. I just wanted my husband to come home. I just wanted it to be over. The courtroom fell silent. Some jurors looked away. One woman on the panel wiped a tear. Reporters furiously typed every word. For months, the public had seen Rachel as the betrayer. But now, the narrative was cracking. And it didn't stop there. Once the defense released that interview, more women came forward. Former inmates, volunteers. One had been a social worker. Another, a nurse intern. All had crossed paths with Warden Keller. All had stories, some subtle, some graphic. But every one of them echoed the same theme: coercion, manipulation, fear wrapped in authority. One woman testified anonymously, "He never touched me, but he made it clear. If I wanted my job to last, I'd better play along." The prosecution scrambled to contain the damage. Their clean-cut narrative of a love triangle was unraveling. And the jury? They no longer saw a jealous husband. They saw a man backed into a corner, his wife used as currency, his freedom dangled like bait. It was no longer just a murder trial. It was a reckoning. And now, the question that hung heavy in the air wasn't, why did he do it? But rather, how was this allowed to happen? What would you have done if your loved one's freedom was being quietly sold behind closed doors? And how many others stayed silent simply because they didn't have the strength or the evidence to speak up? In the end, Derek Monroe took a plea deal: voluntary manslaughter. 10 additional years added to what was supposed to be his final 90 days. No trial for murder, no chance for acquittal. Just a quiet admission that he had snapped, but not without reason. For the public, it was far from closure. Some saw Derek as a cold-blooded killer, a man who turned violent the moment his pride was wounded. Others saw something else: a husband failed by the very system that claimed to have rehabilitated him. A man manipulated through the person he loved most, a victim of a power dynamic that no prison rulebook could have prepared him for. But even as the legal process closed its doors, a deeper reckoning had just begun. A state-led investigation widened its scope. Internal memos were leaked, testimonies mounted. In total, 9 other women came forward with disturbing accounts of Warden Keller's behavior, some dating back over a decade. Some former inmates, others civilians. Each account painted the same picture: a man who weaponized his authority behind locked gates, and a system that quietly looked the other way. The prison board was forced to act. 3 high-ranking officials resigned. 2 internal affairs officers were placed on unpaid leave. The Department of Corrections launched a complete overhaul of visitation protocols statewide. But these changes came too late for Rachel. She survived, barely. Her injuries, though not fatal, required multiple surgeries. But it was the psychological damage that left the deepest scars: PTSD, insomnia, guilt. She entered therapy and has remained out of the public eye ever since. Her father, the pastor who once led her to volunteer in prison ministry, declined to speak publicly. But one family friend shared this: she prays for him every night, and she prays for Derek too. The prison that once touted Derek as its greatest rehabilitation story now bore his name in every scandal. What was once a model redemption arc became a national debate. Was he a reformed man destroyed by corruption? Or was redemption never real to begin with? And for Rachel, for the other women who came forward, and for the broken families left in the aftermath, one question continues to haunt those who watch this story unfold from beginning to end. What do you do when the system meant to rehabilitate you becomes the one that breaks you? How do you trust it again, or worse, how do you survive it? And before we go further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What do you think? Was this justice served? Or just another failure of a system that claims to correct but so often corrupts? Do you believe Derek Monroe deserved more time? Or was he a man pushed beyond reason Beyond patience? Beyond peace? Let us know in the comments. Do you think the inmate should have gotten more time? Or was he pushed too far? And if you've stayed with us this long, we want to thank you. Stories like these aren't easy to hear, but they're important. Because behind every headline is a human life, a moment of decision, a crack in the structure we assume will protect us. And this one? It left us with a scar we're still trying to explain. But if you thought this case was haunting, you won't want to miss what we're covering next. A small-town pastor, his daughter, and a midnight entry through a back gate of a state correctional facility. What was she doing there? And what he discovered nearly tore his church and his family apart. So if this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think twice, click that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. Because sometimes the truth isn't behind bars. It's buried in the places no one dares to look.